Well, Ron wanted me to present him, and I've never done this before. And so I got to thinking about this. You know, I probably know him longer and better than maybe anyone besides his mother, because we've been together about 30 years. And Ron is the kind of guy that, well, this is what attracted me to him, actually. It's like he always was in touch with his heart, far as his truth, and in relation to the world around him. And of course, that is always being redefined and refined, and which is where he's in the process of doing. But he was a contractor and a builder for like over 30 years, and at one point he decided that something was wrong with what he was doing. And he began to look for something else, what to do about this building, because it wasn't feeling right. He told me, he said, Bonnie, it's not feeling right the way I'm building the houses. And we began to search. We looked into green building. We checked out feng shui, which relates to what he's doing. It has a common ground there. And but he didn't find anything that spoke to the builder part until one day I was reading in Sedona Journal, and I found this little article on Vastu, and to be honest, I thought it was a little boring, but I took it to Ron, and he looked at it, and he says, this is it. And from there, things just began to open, and we ended up, he asked so many questions of the teacher, that his American teacher, he says, you need to go to India to get your answers from the guru, the teacher himself. So we spent 4.5 months over there studying with that man, and I was quite amazed. You know, you always are learning new things about your partner when you're living this close together, and I was quite amazed at his depth of a grasp, how he grasped the science, because it seemed to me it was just kind of a strange thing. But he grasped it, and it was like as though he had experience with it for maybe past lives, quite deeply. And so this is how we ended up then, here tonight, and ready to tell you about this fascinating science. I feel honored to be part of it, because it's something that I can endorse with all my heart, and that makes it nice since we're living together. And so thank you for being here. Thank you.
Well, good evening. Thank you, everybody, for being here. And so with all the good introductions, we can get started and move into this, what this Vastu is about, which, how many of you know something about Vastu? So a few of you definitely know something about Vastu, but a lot of hands didn't go up. So, okay, I would like to have a moment of silence. And if you feel like closing your eyes, that's good. A moment of silence going within your heart, just for a moment. Return. And so, okay, I'll start out explaining a little bit about Vastu, but you know, I have taught as many as, I guess, about 18 consecutive days of Vastu, and by the 18th day we're still talking about what is Vastu. So it's not something that we completely define in a few moments here. To start with, maybe to interest your curiosity a little bit and bring a little confusion into the whole thing, and hopefully maybe a little clarity, I'll just mention that Vastu is actually the vibration of the atomic particles within the cells and molecules of your body, our bodies. Vastu is also defined as the frequency of sound vibration and the frequency of light waves that underline everything in the manifest universe, including thoughts and feelings and form and etc. And so essentially Vastu is the energy that sets everything into motion and the energy that sustains everything in motion. So it's also, Vastu is literally the inherent rhythm which holds the atoms and the worlds and the galaxies and the stars, holds them in rhythm and holds them in cohesiveness so that the universe continues to expand and to grow rather than to, we could say, self-destruct. So Vastu is the rhythm, which defines all of creation and reality. And Vastu is also described as the original pulse of manifestation from within the void itself. It's sometimes called the void, though in Vastu we understand the void is anything but empty, and or the beginning, the source of all being, and etc. And so in describing Vastu, it's important to understand that there are actually two Vastus, and the two Vastus are one Vastu, or one essence. First of all, there's Vastu, and secondly, there's Vastu. And the difference is actually in the meter of the word itself. The first, Vastu, is the short pronunciation of the ah, and the short Vastu is actually the subtle potential, which is infinite, incidentally, the subtle potential for all manifestation, or sometimes called the subtle universe because it's a very real dimension, the pure, the raw energy, the subtle universe, and the long Vastu, where the ah is, has a longer wavelength of sound frequency and light waves. This second Vastu is the manifest universe, but the potential universe manifested into experience. And so basically this is an introduction as to what Vastu is. So another way of describing Vastu is that Vastu is all that is on the unmanifest level, and Vastu is all that is on the manifest level. So I hope that clarifies a little bit what Vastu is if you haven't heard of it before. So naturally, Vastu is a very deep study. I've been studying, as my wife Bonnie knows, to introduce, I don't know if she introduced herself. This is Bonnie, my wife, and as she knows, I've been studying Vastu very, you could say, very intensively, put a great deal of time and dedication into it since 1998. And it's a very deep trip. Vastu is a journey, actually, that can take many lifetimes. And it's a very fascinating journey. It's a deep journey. It's an exhilarating journey. It's a healing journey. It's a spiritual journey, and it's a journey into understanding the science of how everything works on a level that allows us to bring our human creations into harmony so that our creations elevate the spirit and heal the body and mind. And that's the purpose of Vastu, is to create in ways that will be a benefit to all beings, to the environment. The benefit is actually inherent within the Vastu itself. So, okay, usually in my Vastu lectures, I have focused primarily on the science, and if you saw my title or subtitle with the RVML for this one, I'm focusing a little bit more on Vastu as a spiritual path, a spiritual journey. So, okay. So we'll move on a little bit into the history of Vastu. The Vastu Vedas are actually said by many who are leaders in the study of the Vastus, the Vedas, and etc. Vastu is actually said to be the original and the oldest and the original of all the Vedic scriptures. And in fact, what's pretty fascinating, and I managed to get in on this fairly early on, is there have been a large number of amount of ancient manuscripts that have been rediscovered in the 70s and 80s and only began to be translated in around 1986, and since then, that had literally been forgotten, and no one was aware that these manuscripts existed. These are very, very ancient manuscripts, and they contained what has been determined to be the first of all the Vedic scriptures of India, and that's the Pranava Veda. which contains 7,000 verses. The Vedas are written in a poetic style, and so 10,000 verses approximately comprise the Pranava Veda, the original Veda. And it's a very remarkable Veda in that it brings into sharp focus and clarity every little mistranslation and distortion and etc. that has inevitably occurred through the many translations of the Vedas down through the centuries. So it's like a return to the original roots of India's culture and the Vedic scriptures. And now what's being emphasized in India itself, especially in South India where these manuscripts have been found and are being translated, is that the Vedic science actually was founded and was in general practice in what we Westerners have called Lemuria, ancient Lemuria. And this is where the Vedic practices actually began. And from all accounts, and this is actually put forth by quite a few notable world scholars today, it would seem that South India is one place where the descendants of an original tribe from Lemuria that carried this science settled in South India and literally have been there ever since. Although parts of that tribe naturally migrated around the world and have become many different nationalities today and parts of other cultures. However, the Vastu Vedas were actually held sacred and intact in South India through the ages, so this is where it seems to be reappearing in its clearest and most empowered context. So, okay, that's just a little bit. I'll give you a little bit more personal level about some of the history here in just a little bit. Some of the oldest records that we've found, and this book, the Aitaram, which is the only one that has been translated into English so far, thanks to Dr. Subardhanam in South India, was originally written, it's been determined, about 13,900 and can't remember the exact year, but about 13,900 BC, or nearly 16,000 years ago. So it's a very ancient manuscript. And this is a remarkable book. It's a very deep study because these scriptures were originally coded. And this is actually a description of not only the most basic atomic particle, but of the subatomic particles and all the steps of creation which manifest the atomic particle, and through the atomic particle, the universe ultimately, and the understanding of what the energy source is that underlies creation, and etc. So that's basically, it's a science book. And we'll talk a little bit more about how this science was generated also here. So most importantly in my talk tonight here is that Vastu really is a spiritual path. It's a spiritual path of remembering and reintegrating body, soul, heart, mind, and spirit. Or we might even say the body electric, the body magnetic, the body of sound waves, the body of light waves, and the original pulse of creation, which in Vastu is considered the creator, or the source of all existence. And this is also called time. And this time I'm referring to in Vastu is called absolute time. And if we get around to it, which I don't think we will have time tonight, well, I'll explain that a little bit more later. And this also refers to subtle time, the short Vastu, which is the eternal now, where time, past, present, and future is simultaneous. And so this level of Vastu also sets the harmonic pitch for all of creation. And the entire universe is harmonized just like a musical instrument is, to that perfect tone or pitch. Otherwise, as most scientists today know, without that perfect pitch or toning, without that fine degree of tuning, the universe would self-destruct and would have self-destructed at the start. So Vastu actually defines that pitch and tells us how to tune what we create, whether it's a language or a poem, whether it's music or dance or art or architecture. It defines and tells us how to tune our creations to that pitch so that the physical creation is tuned to the subtle or spiritual creation for that integration and that healing, and to actually assist those of us who are on a spiritual path to remember and reintegrate. So Bonnie mentioned a little bit about my search for this. And even long before 30 years was up, actually, I was looking for other ways of construction and building. And a few times I got out of building and did other kinds of work until finally one day I said, Spirit, I said, show me what it is that I'm looking for. I haven't found exactly what I'm looking for, what I know I'm really here to do. It's time, show me what I'm looking for. And right after that is when Bonnie saw the article on Vastu. It was a very simple article on Vastu, but in my heart I knew that this was what I was looking for. And I'd never heard the word Vastu before. So that was my instantaneous introduction. And this led me to Dr. Ganapati Stapati in India, who is a very amazing man. He's actually, along with Sabardhanam, is one of the very few people who have been able to translate these old manuscripts I've mentioned, which were written in a language sometimes referred to as Prakrit, which is the mother of Sanskrit language, Tamil language, and I'm sure a number of other, especially South Indian dialects today, all originally spring from the Prakrit. Prakrit means original. It also means pure or original. And so we're told in this Vastu science book, the Ayantharam, who actually told that the Prakrit language was not invented by any human being, but is the natural emanation of sound, vibration, and light waves from the source of being into the physical creation. And so these individuals, like Dr. Stapati, have been able to clearly and accurately translate from these original manuscripts into Tamil. And because English is very much of a secondary language for Tamil, why Dr. Sabardhanam has graced us with the English translations. So I'm getting them into English for those of us who don't know Sanskrit or Tamil. So after becoming aware of Vastu, I began to ask, I contacted the person who wrote the article and began to ask a lot of questions, and was told I'd better go to India and study with Dr. Stapati. So I actually first got hold of all the books that I could get hold of he'd written, and he's been quite a gregarious writer. One of his big books is the Stapatiya Veda, which again is one of the oldest of all Vedas, and Dr. Stapati, Dr. Sabardhanam, and others say that the Stapatiya Veda is actually the cream and the foundation for the entire Indian culture originally. And so I got hold of this book and many other books, such as Stapati's book of Temples of Space Science is another one, and then the Ayantharam itself, and other books. And I studied and read everything I could, and then went over and studied with Dr. Stapati, and actually did about 50 designs because I've been in building most of my life, as Bonnie said, so I did about 50 practice designs with Vastu from everything, just about from houses to churches to commercial buildings to factories to town community layouts and et cetera, because I wanted to get the feel of the whole thing and the science while I was there. Incidentally, Vastu is a science of the heart, and many, when we try to just make it a logical mental exercise, we not only miss the point, but as the Ayantharam tells us, we actually won't understand what the point is. So it's actually a practice of opening the heart, of taking the path of reintegration between mind and body, soul and spirit, and which is a very rewarding path, because I find the practice of Vastu itself supports healing. It supports, I mean, as Bonnie knows, my life has been very amazing since I started on Vastu. It's an acceleration. It will bring out what's hiding in our subconscious. It will do a lot of things for us, as well as provide a path of healing. So I won't get into detail about that right now. However, I don't know how many of you have been to India. I'm sure some of you have. Okay, at least a couple of you have been to India. That's a pretty amazing trip itself. And we actually got this book and read it, called Culture Shock. Have you seen that book? It's a good book to read before you went to India. For myself, however, when I went to India, immediately right from the start, I said, where have I been all this time? I felt so at home. I apologize to all of you Americans, but I said, well, this is where I feel at home, and I did the whole time. I got back to America and I said, ooh, ouch. I've been no wonder much of my life I felt like, how do I fit in here in America? Because I often felt that way. In India, it was a homecoming. And it was a really wonderful time for me. Although I spent about 60 hours a week in Stoppage's office, but it was a wonderful time. We took some trips too. But I will mention one thing, though, a bit of culture shock. We stayed our first night after we landed in Chennai at a 5-star motel, just so our host wouldn't have to come and get us in the middle of the night when we landed at the airport. Oh, another thing that was interesting, we flew over in January 1st, 2003, not long after the 9/11. So everything in America, and when we got to Southeast Asia, everything was just as tight. Security, you know how it is and how it was. But it was very tight then. It's at least gotten a little more friendly since. It was like this stern-faced, are you who you say you are? Who are you? Where are you going? What are you going for? But what really took us by surprise was then we finally landed in Chennai, India in the middle of the night. And that was as relaxed as though nothing had ever happened on planet Earth. It was a very relaxed airport. And the people were relaxed, so that was interesting. And then the next morning we met our hostess, at whose house we stayed the entire time. She brought a taxi and met us at a restaurant there near our motel. And so we went right out in the taxi and went through the streets of Chennai. It used to be Madras, but the Indian name is Chennai. It's been changed back to that. A city of about 5 million people. And that was my first time to ride in Chennai. And so at first, I sat there in the taxi, and I immediately knew that the next moment we were going to have a wreck, because there didn't seem to be any rules, any traffic regulations, and I know some other countries are the same way. But everything was rushing pell-mell, and our taxi was streaking past buses 6 inches away. And I don't think that's much exaggeration, actually, from a few things that I experienced. And so I said, we're going to have an accident any moment. Then I said, okay, this is a good time to practice a little meditation, breathe, relax. So I did, and it was a good practice, because from then on I relaxed in driving through all of India's traffic, which we had a lot of, so a wild ride. Just a few little interesting things, not quite Vastu, or maybe it is. One thing we noticed, you can feel it, you can tune into it. India as a culture tends to be a little more heart-oriented. We as a culture tend to be more mental-oriented. I think that's one reason I felt so at home there. And we noticed this actually rubs off, evidently. It's an ancient civilization on the animals. It was amazing how the ravens, for instance, work with the people. When they use the rice to make the mandalas out on their front steps, the ravens leave it alone. But when they just throw out rice to the ravens or put something else out, they come and get it. And we had some interesting experience with the ravens too. one raven that got very upset with us because we didn't agree with it. I would tell that funny story. Actually, a crow, yeah. The crows. I would tell that story, but we don't have time for so many stories tonight. We also noticed that the animals in general, almost always, the water buffalo, the goats, the hound dogs that roam the streets, and etc., they stop at the red lights with the traffic, and they go with the green, and we almost never saw an animal run across the road and get hit. So it's like an intuitive flow between anima and human. So we found that kind of interesting. So, okay. So I will just mention, actually, Bonnie, we might put on, let's see, what do we have here? Let's put that on for a little shift, and then I'll get back into this a little bit.
Ron, we're just going to move this to the side until you're ready for it. Is it okay? Or put it on the side?
Kind of interference, yeah, that's one reason we took the board down, but still interferes a bit, doesn't it? Okay. Yeah. So, I will just read this. This is very much oriented at the heart of Vastu science as far as in spiritual form. In the center of the castle of Brahman, our own body, Brahman being creator, there is a small shrine in the form of a lotus flower. And within can be found a small space. We won't have time to get into that. I'm interrupting the prayer here, but that small space is crucial to life itself, as we understand through Vastu. We should find who dwells there in that small space, and we should want to know this one. And if anyone asks, who is it who dwells in the small shrine in the form of a lotus flower in the center of the castle of Brahman? We can answer, the little space within the heart is as great as this universe. The heavens and the earth are there, the sun, the moon, the stars, fire and lightning and winds, for the whole universe is in this one who dwells within our heart. And let's put the next one on then. So Vastu is actually very explicit that within every cell of our own bodies exists every sound frequency and light impulse of the entire universe. Not figuratively speaking, but actually. So one very interesting thing about Vastu is that we are not disconnected from the universe, or me from you, or you from me, because every vibration of the universe vibrates within our own cells. In other words, all of the individuality and variety of the universe is one. And so another aspect of Vastu science, in sound, through music, in the body through dance, in words through poetry, in space through architecture, in form through sculpture, in thought through mathematics, a person can experience the divine. So, okay, I'm getting tangled in this cord. So what's the next one? Let's just put the next one on too while we're at it. Okay, that I don't think you can read that. It's gotten a little dim. This is a picture of Dr. Stapati here, the subtle Vastu up above here. And so these are three quotes from Dr. Stapati. He says, in the heart of the cave of the body, there is inner space, and in that inner space, there is a vibrant thread of consciousness. It is this thread of consciousness that functions as the musical string of the bodily instrument. The structure of the Vastu-inspired building, talking about a literal building now, vibrates with cosmic energy, and the bodily instrument resonates with this vibration. In other words, the bodily instrument will come into resonance with the vibration of the building, which resonates in turn with cosmic space. So, okay, you can take that one off, and we'll turn it off for now. So I'll skip a little bit of this because I nearly always, just following a few notes, I nearly always have like 6 hours. So, and we don't have that time. So I'll skip a little of this. I want to explain a little bit about how the Vastu science originally came into being. For instance, modern, today's science, how do we actually understand how our universe works in today's science? Well, primarily we do it through what's called blind studies, double-blind studies, right? I mean, isn't that interesting? The more blind you get, the more you know. So we do a double-blind study, and we prove how something works. And actually, it takes millions of dollars to do a double-blind study, and that's why most alternative methods today don't have the double-blind study, so they're not part of mainstream science. It's an expensive thing. And literally, double-blind studies existed a long time ago, but they were free. And I know probably all of you have heard this story, and I haven't even checked on it recently. So it's kind of in my distant memory. But for instance, a long time ago, they took 5 blind men to view an elephant. This is a good blind study. And one blind man felt the tail and said, well, the elephant's like a rope. Another one felt the leg and said, well, the elephant's like a tree. Another one, I believe, felt the ear and said, well, it's very like a fan. Well, actually, if they'd known, they want to be a little bit aware if the fan starts working too hard, something starts happening, because they're touching something that is very powerful, a great deal of power. They're just not seeing the whole picture. And so I'll just say, without being critical, the problem with most of our science today is that we're focusing on a little part of the picture here and a little part of the picture there, and we're not getting the whole picture. And without the whole picture, do we really know how it works? And do we really know how the piece works? Well, back in the older times, the old-timers treated science a little differently. They actually saw science as something that vibrated within their own physical cells and within their own consciousness. So the scientists that existed in those days were ones who had not only sat in a cave, if they did that, and meditated for 50 years and integrated body, soul, mind, heart, and spirit, they also studied science. I won't have time to get into some of this history, but it's very interesting. Because back in the Lemurian days, there were what was called in the Tamil history the great Sangams. These were great universities which actually gathered the eminent scientists and students and teachers from the entire world came to these great universities. And finally, the last Sangam was held in what is now South India. And that was literally the last Sangam quite a few thousands of years ago, I believe about 10,000 years ago. Anyway, in those days, they studied science, and the emphasis was on that integration of body, soul, mind, and spirit. And then the great and eminent scientists would actually go into deep meditation, and they would explore science through their own inner beings. They would explore the atom, the subatomic particle, the universe. And so what's rather fascinating in our studies with Vastu is what we learned from these manuscripts that have been rediscovered in recent years is that the individual considered to be the greatest scientist of all time, known in those days, was one called Mayan. And so Mayan, at 12 years of age, was sitting with his father and his mother in front of their home in the evening, and he was thinking about, now I am both a product of my father and my mother, and yet I am also distinctly and uniquely myself. And he became consumed with such a desire to understand how the universe works. That it said that he went into the universe and into the heart of the earth and of the sun, and from there was taken into the heart of Source and was actually told that he was the only human being in incarnation that had ever traveled that distance with full consciousness. So then he is actually, he's given credit for actually having founded what's called the Vastu science, and we find out became a worldwide science with different names and terminologies in different languages. However, this science was definitely practiced worldwide in all of the Great Pyramids, all of the South American Mayan and Incan buildings, and all over the world until it finally began to get a little distorted, a little lost, and et cetera, in many parts of the world. So that's a little bit more about, that's how the Vastu science comes into being. And that's how we comprehend science today, is opening our hearts, as well as studying and applying ourselves to the knowledge of science, of the science. So, okay. So Mayan, literally, and this is pretty clear because it's written right in the text themselves, Mayan was the author of the first Vedas, namely the Pranava Veda, and the Aintram, which I have here. And so he wrote these books, and then he wrote well over a million verses of other books and manuscripts. And some of these are lost or it's not known where they are, but about 1 million verses have been found today, and some of those, it looks like, have been lost again. I won't get into that whole story right now, but some have been lost again, and some people are trying to find those. About 400,000 verses are in the keeping of the Tamil Nadu government, and another fairly good segment of them are in Dr. Stapadi's keeping. And so these are very interesting because Mayan wrote in detail about health, about music and dance, and language, and art, and sculpture, and architecture. He wrote about multidimensional aspects of all of these, about many, many, many things which we imagine and talk about and are rediscovering today, and yet he had carried into a profound application. He also wrote in detail about how to build spaceships, how to power spaceships. He had tremendous knowledge. He actually, at one time, Mayan had a central generator which powered all vehicles, land and air, and all their power needs for the entire planet Earth. And later, because wars were beginning, in his time, he actually cut that supply off, slowing down what was happening as far as between continents and so forth at that time. So, just let's see. I'll get into just a little bit more here about the science. However, is there just real briefly any question right now about anything we've been talking about? Or if not, we'll get on into a bit of science. Yes?
What kind of place in southern India were these documents discovered? I mean, we know about Qumran, for example, and these pots and such.
Let's see. Some of them, if I can remember the name of the library, they were discovered in South India. And a large portion of these manuscripts were discovered in a long unused dusty wing of a very ancient library. I think it's the Saraha library, I believe. The name slips in my mind a little bit at the moment of the library. But most of these have been found in South India, which seems to hold the key as far as manuscripts that kind of made the shift from Lemuria into the Indian subcontinent about 13,000 to 14,000 years ago. Yes?
Can you go into a little bit about how the pyramids are Vastu?
So, okay, so you want to know a little bit about how the pyramids are made with Vastu. Actually, I will skip that one right now, just because it's involved enough. I don't think we'll have time to get into it. Yeah.
Were these scrolls run out of parchment or paper, or what was the composition?
I believe the scrolls that were found in the library were actually palm leaf, and they had almost undoubtedly been copied more than once and then lost track of for literally several thousand years. These palm leaf manuscripts do last for a long time. However, they were lost to view, and so consequently, later versions of the original Vedas got retranslated by people who didn't have the full understanding, but this happened in a stair-step level. So I'm told by the best of people over there today, like Dr. Stavati, that the Vedas today have gotten watered down quite a bit, just simply because of the and yet they still have a lot of the original, but they've also gotten watered down. So this has been a remarkable find. Dr. Subbartnam is a Brahmin by birth. That's the priesthood of India. And he says that discovering Mayan's translations through Stapati originally for him, and working on the translations has literally transformed his entire spiritual life. Brought in a whole different world that he said we hadn't even imagined existed until we rediscovered these manuscripts, both spiritual and scientific.
Just quick,
Yes.
quick. So Mayan had this generator.
Yes.
Do you suppose there's any correlation, I'm just speculating, but wondering, that technology and what was with the Ark of the Covenant?
Okay, so you're asking if there's a relationship between Mayan's generator and the Ark of the Covenant?
Yeah.
I'm not sure that there would be a direct relationship. Mayan generator, I understand, had, I don't know much about it at this point because we don't have the translation of the manuscripts, aren't even translated into modern Tamil at this time, or Sanskrit even. However, his generator, I understand, had something to do with a giant quartz crystal, and I don't know how he utilized that to actually create an energy generator. But it would have had to, but the science of Vastu would definitely appear in the Ark of the Covenant, or it's the same science.
Thank you. I'm on a track trying to find answers to things like that, so thank you.
Oh, okay. Well, Vastu will explain a great deal of that ultimately as you get the knowledge of the Vastu. Well, I think we'd better move on a little bit here. We'll have more time for questions a little later. So let's put a few more diagrams on. What do you have next? Okay, Vastu is the subtle universe, raw energy, pure and infinite potential. Let's have the next one. Okay, Vastu and Vastu, subnuclear and nuclear physics and quantum mechanics. We actually have eminent scientists that are getting into Vastu today with great fascination. NASA has become distinctly interested in Vastu recently. Okay, let's have the next one for some reason. Okay, yes, and I'd mentioned this already. From the earliest times, original pulse. That's something I like to describe. I haven't. However, Vastu describes the energy, the generator for all energy. The original generator is a little hard to put into English language terminology, something I've been trying to figure out for some time here, for the last 8 or 10 years. But Vastu tells us that the original generator of energy, of all energy, is actually what we could call pure consciousness, pure conscious awareness, pure consciousness that actually has been called the void because at that level there's no vibration, and yet it is in a state of vibrancy, if that makes sense. It's in a state of expectant vibrancy forever. And from that state of expectant vibrancy, there actually emanates from the very core of that void or that level of expectant vibrancy or that pure consciousness, because of the quality of that is contained, there arises what we describe as an ecstatic ecstasy, which is the closest feeling to the inherent level of that source or that pure consciousness. That ecstasy, anything less than that ecstasy, we are taught in Vastu, does not contain enough inherent energy to actually set anything in motion. That ecstasy literally sets in motion a pulse of energy with the intent to express that inner ecstasy. So if you want to know how to create, That's the secret. It's that inner ecstasy that actually generates energy and sets in motion that pulse. So that original pulse is a vibration. It's a motion. And it's a vibration. And from that particle, which is a subatomic particle, Vastu teaches us then the steps all the way through to the basic sound atom and basic light atom, as it's called in Vastu, which sets the stage for the creation of multiple atomic groups and so forth. And so what is called time, that pulse is called time because it sets specific frequency rates and wavelengths that inherently and exactly prescribe what will manifest from that particular pulse. So time sets the rhythm or the pulse and the vibration for all creation at the micro level. At least at the micro level, that pulse is something like every 1/4 quadrillionth of a second, and that could be called the micro heartbeat of the universe at that level. And so that pulse then is harmonically amplified and copied through macro levels until you reach a macro level of time, which is an entire time beat for the whole universe. In our estimation, that will even see the birth and death of planets and solar systems, and even the birth and death of an entire universe. So that's a little bit about and so Vastu actually measures these pulses, the micro pulse and the macro pulse and all of the pulses in between, so that we can understand those and utilize those. So let's have the next one. So Vastu, the long A, or the long A is actually what it is the unmanifest made manifest. The universe of physical form and experience. It is thought and feeling, pure thought and pure feeling become manifest. That's actually the only thing that exists. So when we create an imbalanced emotional body, what some call the imbalanced ego, and etc., we're simply getting our musical instrument is getting a little out of resonance. It's getting a little dissonant with the natural resonance of creation. That's a very difficult thing to do. We don't believe that on planet Earth right now, but it's actually a difficult thing to do because it's most natural to be in resonance. And so it should be easy. And then we all find ourselves asking ourselves, well, why does it not seem so easy then? Well, we have to be a little patient, I think, with ourselves and on the way to getting there. Okay, let's have the next one. Or what do you have next? Okay, let's hold off on that one for just a moment. So, incidentally, so the Vastu science is primarily about resonance. And Vastu tells us that to understand music fully is to understand everything in the universe. And also to understand sound and to understand light is to understand everything in the universe. Also, Vastu tells us that to understand the vibrations of time is to become a master of time, and literally, Mayan tells us, because Mayan was the author of the Eintrim, Mayan tells us in the Eintrim that the master of time is no longer bound by time or even by the natural providential order of time, but becomes literally the creator of time. So he's talking about individuals. So there's a lot of fascinating potential in Vastu, but right now we keep it fairly simple and not get too carried away. So, okay. I wanted to mention then that if you're familiar with any of the traditional Indian, and this does carry out in traditions all over the world, it's just going to be a little different focus, different languages, and so forth. The traditional Ayurvedic medicine, the yoga, and also the dance, such as the Bharatanatyam dance, which is a little different focus from the yoga, and also the tradition of the Vedic mathematics, and then the Sthapatya Veda, which is art and sculpture and architecture, and also the practice of language itself as an art and music. these are all exactly the same science. So as a builder, what is fascinating to me is, as a builder, and when we design a building, we use exactly the same science that the musician uses. We use the same rhythm. We use the same measurements transferred from the sound rhythm to the spatial rhythm, because light, all visual form is made of light waves with subtle sound vibration. All audible form, such as music, is made of sound waves with subtle light form. So every musical note has its own geometrical form, its own light ray or color of light ray, and every physical form, which is physical light waves in manifestation, contains its own subtle sound vibrations. And so it goes. Well, Vastu tells us that just as with a musical instrument, now sound at that level is not subtle, it's physical. So it's very evident to us. And sound at that level, if you have a perfect ear, if you have perfect pitch, if it's not tuned very well, and even if you don't, for most of us, if it's out of tune, why that doesn't sound right to us, and it's not uplifting as the music is when the instrument, and every instrument in the orchestra is tuned in. So Vastu tells us that the spatial form, when it's not sized correctly, even a book, that the vibrations will become dissonant, they're not in tune. So the same wavelengths that emanate from a particular musical note that's in tune, we measure these wavelengths and we will size a book or a building or an art or a sculpture to resonate with specific wavelengths so that it feels just as good as the music feels when the instruments are attuned. So I hope that makes a little bit of sense. So that's a piece of Vastu, a piece of the whole picture, because I haven't found yet in my study of Vastu, I haven't found it missing anything. It's simply a holistic science, which is very exciting. And I'm going to demonstrate in a little while, just for the fun of it, a little bit of Vedic math for you. Let's see. Near the end, I think you have, okay, just a little below that. You have, I think these are, oh, these are them. I'd like to just put these two on, this one. Let's see. Yeah, this one first, and then the other one. If you can find it, there's another one that has the numbers. That should be about where we got these. But we can go ahead and put that one on. And I can stick this on if you think you can find the numbers there. So the Tamil language, the original Tamil language, really the Prakrit language, which has come through largely in the Sanskrit and in the Tamil and in some other South Indian dialects we find with a lot of research, has come through in many of these dialects, is a language of light vibrations and of sound vibrations, which are, or hopefully are, as in the original Prakrit, are actually attuned to the actual vibrations that manifest atoms and manifest pure thought and feeling, manifest the universe, the stars, galaxies, planets, etc. And in the science of language, Vastu science, the vowel resonates as the vibration of sound. And so I will just mention the sound is actually primarily feeling-based. That's the ecstasy. That's the energy source. And sound energizes light. So the vowel resonates as the vibration of sound, and the consonant as the vibration of light. Light is the logic. It brings order. It brings divine order into the picture so that the sound is created as a particular musical composition or piece, so that there's actually a specific experience. Otherwise, there would be no specific experience. The Tamil language is based upon the threefold functions of poetry, music, and dance. It is also based upon the fivefold functions of poetry, music, dance, sculpture, and building, architecture. So when we design a building, we actually consciously design the universal language so that the building becomes a communication device. It's actually so that it communicates both between the celestial and the terrestrial, between the human and the spiritual, and so forth. The Vastu Purusham Mandala, or universal energy grid, is the energy foundation for both empowered language and empowered building structures. All the creative arts of life utilize the universal vibrations of light and sound. So, okay, and you have that one. Well, we'll skip this one and just take the one with the numbers then. So now this, I haven't been able to get this quite as old as these manuscripts I'm talking about, as Mayans' work. But this is coming from about 2,000 years ago, kind of the base for our present numbering system today, which were numbered, were actually written with angles rather than the circular. And you'll notice that each number 1 has one inside angle.
Could you move that up just a little bit, please?
What's that?
Could you move it up a little bit?
Thanks.
Thanks.
Oh, okay, yes. Number 1 was written with 1 inside angle, number 2 with 2 inside angles, number 3, 3 inside angles. You can actually count the inside angles. Will accurately be within each one. Number 9 actually has 9 inside angles, 8, 7, 6, 4, 5, and so forth. And this is 0 or 10. However, in Mayans' day, the original 0 was a square. And we explain that in Vastu, but that has to be in my workshops that I teach to get into all of that. The original 0 is square in form. The circle also exists, however, so just has a different meaning. So, okay, we can take that one off. So I'm going to give us just a little bit of a break on the questions. Why don't you put the first picture on there, just for the fun of it here. This is Bonnie and I and our daughter Holly, who joined us for 6 weeks. She was 16 then, and we're at a temple near Mamallapuram, which the Europeans say was built about 11,000 years ago. One of the very ancient temples there, and it was built entirely with the Vastu science that we speak of. Let's have the next picture then, please. And this is the main temple of Mamallapuram. One thing interesting about this temple, I don't know if you that have been to India have been to the temple of Mamallapuram, but it's one of the ancient artifacts, certainly of India, built 11 or 12,000 years ago. And the foreground here is all sand, and it covers the top of a huge boulder that's kind of the top of a low mountain or hill. And this entire temple is carved out of this boulder instead of being stones laid stones as it usually happened. This is all just carved out of this piece of boulder. Between 11 and 12,000 years ago. That's a life-size elephant there, and etc. So let's have the next picture, please. This is one of Dr. Stoppady's power antennas. A building like this will actually affect the land and the planetary grid, not only the land around it, but even the planetary grid, and serve different purposes. This is the gateway to the Tamil University, a very large university which Dr. Stoppady designed and built. And this is the gateway. And this bottom picture, can you move that up a bit? This bottom picture is a very large circular library, round library, that's the Tamil University library there. I was inside. It's a beautiful building. Then Stoppady is a master craftsman in sculpture, so they make beautiful sculptures out of granite and wood, etc. Okay, the next picture. I will just mention that in Stoppedy's buildings, and I have a couple buildings to my credit so far where there have been similar experiences. In Dr. Stoppedy's buildings, many different people from different walks of life have experienced spontaneous healing, spontaneous remission of disease. I have several witnesses that go along with mine as of now, that from individuals that have worked in Stoppedy's office all day and found to their surprise that they come down at the end of the day feeling as fresh and energized as they did at the beginning of the day. This is the way it actually should be. Our buildings tend to actually lower our energy if they're not in resonance, and they can tend to drain our energy to lower our energy unless we're really a master at energy transmutation. And we actually can have buildings that uplift us body, soul, and spirit and energize our bodies and our minds. And people experience this in the Vastu buildings very literally.
What is the gesture in the left hand of that figure?
I actually don't, let's see. No, I don't remember the interpretation of that gesture. This is one of the famous poets historically of Tamil Nadu. And this was commissioned, I believe, even by the Tamil Nadu government, and Dr. Stoppedy designed and built it. The statue itself, the entire edifice is nearly 300 feet tall, I think. It's very large, and it's built on this little rocky promontory off the coast, out in the ocean. It's not too far from Sri Lanka. The part of the coast that faces Sri Lanka there are not too far from there. And I even have a photograph Dr. Stoppedy sent me when the big tsunamis hit of the waves striking this, but it didn't move at all. It's as perfectly upright, plumb as it was to start with. And incidentally, this entire structure is not anchored in any way. It has a foundation, but it's entirely freestanding, and it's approximately 2-ton stones, the entire structure, approximately 2-ton stones, laid one upon another. The full height of the sculpture is something like 155 feet. And they're laid one on top of another, and I believe without mortar. And you can't get a paper in the cracks of any stone. The master craftsman. So Dr. Stoppedy, in fact, they say, has done more than anyone else in India to actually revive the art of sculpting and laying with stone in India. So okay, let's see what we're...
We're due for break time.
Is it break time now? Okay, so we'll stop for a break before we get into a little bit more, and we'll get into a little bit more science and then have more time for questions. Okay, back to Vastu science here. So actually the intent and purpose of Vastu science all the way through, the kind of materials that are harvested, where they're harvested, when, how they're harvested is all taken into account. And the manner in which they're harvested in Vastu, every material in nature, both the rocks and minerals as well as the trees and grass for weaving, whatever is harvested originally in Vastu, as in Ayurvedic medicine, is treated as a sacred entity, a living entity. And when the materials are harvested in this manner, the divine essence is actually literally infused into the material, and it really does make a difference. Modern tests and sensitive people as well. We have many that are testifying this today, including research with electronic equipment in Germany that is happening today too. But it makes a difference, a big difference. So when these materials, the wood or the stone or whatever is used, or the earth, the clay, is actually infused through these sacred means and methods, with energy and with resonance and with what we can call the divine essence, then the building becomes more energized, and it becomes a living building. And now in Vastu we say that it's either a dead space or a living space, and the Vastu building is one that is actually alive. It's a living, vibrating space in which to live, in the same way with all the other aspects of our creativity. And so Vastu operates with specific musical laws of harmony that govern geometrical and spatial precision, and these play an invaluable role in bringing wholeness and consciousness, healing, and integration into our creations. So let's go ahead and put on. I'm going to go through a few diagrams here just real quickly. And so just kind of let these focus into your heart instead of your head, because in our workshops we explain these in detail, and we don't have time to do that. But these little simple diagrams are actually a language, the language of spirit, the language of the heart, as well as an understanding of how the atom and life itself and form manifests into the universe. So this is the Moolam, which is represented by a minute dot. And as far as the physical representation and our comprehension of it, we would say that it doesn't exist, because it's without form, it's without space. Okay, the next one. But that is what we could call pure consciousness, or the source point of energy, timeless and spaceless. And yet it holds the potential for time and space, is always vibrant within that potential. So the very first pulse that takes place from that inner ecstasy at that source level is called the pulse, or the dot, which is so minute. It is much, much, much more minute than what we think of today as the atom. This is the first original pulse, the most minute possible point of existence, and in that way this pulse is also without time or space, or we could say that it contains the whole universe, and all time and space is actually condensed and contained, if you can imagine that, within this original pulse. Okay, the next one. So I know this may not make sense to everybody right now, but just kind of open your heart to these diagrams rather than trying to figure it out mentally right now. The original pulse actually radiates on a one or two-dimensional plane here, and later on a tridimensional plane, but it radiates and replicates itself in all directions. And because the pulse becomes very, very rapid, it begins to form the appearance of a line, and in all directions. And so that's where we begin to see the pulse take shape and appear as lines appearing. That pulse is far, far more rapid than any idea of the speed of light, incidentally, in reality. So, okay, the next one. I don't know if I mentioned, but we do have, I did mention, NASA, we do have some eminent scientists that are getting very, very interested right now in the Vastu science. So the Moolam then, just like a musician chooses to create a specific theme in this ecstatic discharge and explosion of its energy as pulse. And because of this, as the energy discharge moves outward, it is also pulled inward. So there's both the spiral outward and the spiral inward. This sometimes is referred to as the out-breath and the in-breath. And this takes place at a micro level at every 4 quadrillionths of a second is one way of looking at this, while you and the whole universe disappear back into the void, and every 4 quadrillionths of a second we reappear in manifestation. We don't notice that. So this very primal formation of the pulse, forming the appearance of lines and angles through that out and in, is still squarish at this level because the circular is the manifestation of the physical form. And this is called the swastika. I'm sure you've heard of it. In the swastika, the direction of these angles will be reversed in the in-breath. The direction of these angles, clockwise, is the out-breath, our manifestation. The next one. And so this expression continues. This is something our great scientist Mayan from Lemuria, or as in the old records in South India, actually called Cimmerian continent. But without question, the same thing referred to as Lemuria. So the scientist Mayan tells us that this form here, that pulse continues to expand outward and forms through that propulsion outward and that impulsion inward. It forms a perfect square, which is exactly 8 by 8. And this is, if you count them, it's 7 notes. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. 7 notes form an 8 by 8 square. There are actually 5 rays of emanation from the center outward. And this forms a complete expression of source. They're literally, when you study deeper into this, it makes more and more and more sense. But there literally cannot be an original expression beyond the 8 by 8. And there cannot be an expression less than the 8 by 8, or the physical manifestation would be left unformed. And so within this 8 by 8, even one minute sub-particle, atomic particle of the 8 by 8, within that single particle literally lies the inherent potential of all time, all space, all universes. And at the same time, this 8 by 8 is also representative of the fractal universe because it exists on the micro level. And each of these little squares contains within them the 8 by 8, each little square in them the 8 by 8, and so forth. So infinity actually exists within that 8 by 8. This is the subtle level, not the physical level of manifestation. Yes?
Ron, isn't the chessboard also 8 by 8?
I believe so. Yeah, I haven't been a great player, but yeah, I think so. There's actually a lot of things if you get back in more of the old original Aboriginal or around the world traditions. And so then if you'd put on the next one, please. So the energy becomes so intense, far beyond what we're used to thinking of as the splitting of an atom. The energy becomes so intense within this 8 by 8 particle that it literally goes into self-spin. Every 4 quadrillions of a second, it spins outward and then inward, outward and then inward. And this, Mayan tells us, appears to be simultaneous, but is not. He says it is actually, what's the correct word? Instead of simultaneous, it's sequential. It's actually sequential, the outward and then the inward, the outward and then the inward, the out-breath and then the in-breath. And so let's see. Okay, the next one, please. So this subtle particle of light and sound goes into self-spin because of the dynamics of energy from within the center, which is still the void. Within the center of this, maybe you could move that up. Within the center is the void. That's the space, seemingly empty space, and that's where all the energy comes from. And so it literally goes into a self-spin, this 8 by 8, and in doing so, the corners collapse and it throws itself outward on the sides. And it goes first, it represents itself in an octagonal form and then into a full circular form, which is the completely manifest, perfect manifest form of the atom of light and sound. That's the most minute atom, not your atomic elements, but that would be the foundation for them. And so Mayan also tells us, he didn't use pi incidentally. Mayan never used anything that had the tiniest inaccuracy. Mayan tells us, some are working on this to figure out his calculations again. He tells us that the circle, the final circle here, is of exactly the same area as the original subtle cube of potential. And that's the spinning microatom. And he also tells us that the circle extends exactly 1/2 of one of these squares outward on the sides, exactly 1/2 of one of those squares out on each side, which what happens, because this is 8 squares across, 1/2 of a square more is 8.5 on this side, and 1/2 of a square is another 1/2 makes it 9. So this actually is the same. Hey, we have something in trouble.
Are you saying that the circle has the same area as the 8x8?
Exactly, with no error, according to Mayan. And because it extends exactly 1/2 of one of these squares out on each side, it literally measures the same as 9 of these original squares across in all directions. And in Vastu, the transmutation of energy into matter is the transmutation of 8 into 9. So Vastu says that the essence of 8 and 9 are exactly the same, however representing 2 different dimensions of experience. So if that makes a little sense. And this becomes important when we study and utilize Vastu. What's that?
So you're talking about squaring the circle then?
Right, yeah. So, okay, the next one. So I'm just running through this a little bit. I hope it's of some interest. We teach these things in our workshops and how to use it, but
It looked
how
like
to use
the
it.
octagon exceeded the 8x8 square by 1/4, bisecting the distance on each of the sides of the circle.
Oh, okay. Yeah.
The distance between the circle and the square
Yeah.
is bisected by the octagon.
And if it's really done correctly, it also has the same area as the circle and the square.
Yeah.
So then this is just a picture, I think, from the internet that I threw in here. The 8x8 said to be the picture of from one view of a DNA molecule. Oh, let's have the next one then, please.
That's an end-on view of the double helix.
Yeah. Okay, that's of interest, but we don't really have time for all of this. Let's go with the next one. So what we do is we actually square the circle in this way. We create a 9x9 grid, which Mayan in Vastu tells us carries exactly the same essence and resonance and harmonics as the 8x8 subtle grid. So this 9x9 grid creates the same resonance. The circle is the activated form of the subtle grid, and the 9x9 square on the physical level is the quiescent form of the subtle grid of the 8x8. And this becomes very important when we go to create, because we utilize these different forms for different purposes. And when we actually want to return in our consciousness to the inner source, we're going to create a 9x9 square grid as the basic for that. This plays out in geometry in a lot of different ways because there's actually, Vastu creates with all of the grids from a single unitary grid, a 2x2, a 3x3, all the way through a 32x32 grid. But this is the basic grid that carries the perfect essence of the 8x8 as the 9x9. So, okay, the next. This one is a little too involved to get into here tonight. It's actually the full multidimensional picture with the 12 primary places plus the spots plus the 13th, which is the source or the center void, and the 4 major energy. These are energy knots where energy rays of sound and light cross each other and form a self-circular motion. And these are power points when understood in the body. These are the primary life points in the body. When we create a Vastu building as a builder, we always create these power points within the building consciously so that the building can vibrate with life force. So, okay, the next one. And let's see what else. Let's not put those on. I have a bunch of different geometrical forms, the flower of life, and several things. But I think we'll pass most of that. Now let's skip that one too. Little bit of building design work, but we kind of need to skip through most of these. Is that everything there?
I think so.
Oh, okay. Well, thanks, Bonnie. So I thought for interest I would, let's see, how much time do we have left?
About 20 minutes.
About 20 minutes. I'd like to get your questions, but I thought for interest I would show you something that is distinctly related to Vastu. Make it a little easier to see. I'll raise these up a little bit here. A little easier for everybody to see. So, okay. Well, let's see. Bruce had this over here. Maybe I have to sit over here. Or can you get this where it is?
Yeah.
Okay. If it's not a problem, I will do that. Something I and some friends are studying right now, because I'm just beginning the study myself. So a few of us have gotten together, and because I happen to have the foundational work from India to give us the curriculum to study with, and that's Vedic math. Are any of you familiar with Vedic math? This is the mathematics that was used in South India 2,000 years ago to far beyond that. But what's that?
The Yugas in the day of Brahman and that.
Well, it would be part of that. What's interesting about the Vedic math is that it actually fell into disuse even in India. It virtually disappeared. And a very amazing individual in India, through deep meditation, finally translated the Vedic scriptures. The Vedas pertaining specifically to math, because nobody was interpreting them. They gave up, and in fact most of them, I guess it's sour grapes, said, oh, these are a particular part of the Vedas that have no real purpose. But he cracked the code after spending 6 years in the forest. And this was in the 20th century. And so due to him, why we have the Vedic math back again.
Is that Sapati or somebody else?
What's that?
Was it Sapati or somebody?
No, it's someone else. Actually, I just don't really even try to remember his name. You could call him Jagadguru Tirthaji if you want to. Swami Sri Bharata Krishna Tirthaji Maharaja. But he is a very amazing man and has been honored in India as both one of the most spiritual as well as one of the most brilliant intellects in India in modern times. But he brought back the original Vedic math, which is the reason why Mayan did computations that they're now figuring out with the computer, because until you get a glimpse of Vedic math, scientists and engineers today say, well, these computations couldn't be done without a computer. But there's nowhere in any records that Mayan used a computer. And he did the most amazing computations, calculating within the finest degrees, thousandths of a second, the orbits of planets and even galaxies and et cetera. So he had all these computations. I'm just going to demonstrate a little bit of Vedic math here to give you an idea that there's a very different math system than what we're used to. And just by way of explanation, I will mention that Jagadguru has actually brought back, and Vedic math covers every known field of mathematics. Basic math, algebra, geometry, trigonometry. It literally covers everything. And I'm only going to show you a little multiplication tonight. So now in our math, if one of you knows something I don't, you can tell me, but the only thing I know is if you haven't learned your multiplication tables and you want to know what 7 times 9 is, and well, one way I know of doing it is you can draw 7 circles or lay out 9 apples and lay 9 apples out 7 times and then count them. If you don't know your math tables and don't have anyone to ask, is there another way to calculate it?
Do it in tens and take away 7.
Yeah, or you can do that. Well, in Vedic math, if you want to calculate 7 times 9, what we do, Vedic math is nonlinear. We could say it's sort of a multidimensional math because it explores the relationships between all numbers, and it has certain base numbers, and the rules that you learn in Vedic math are universal rules. So they, in other words, will work all through the whole system for every kind of problem. What we do with 7 times 9, okay, we write down the 9 times 7, and the Vedic Sutra says, so then we have to understand how to interpret that. It says all from 9 and the last from 10. Well, I'm just going to get in, we're going to use that 10 here in an explicit way. So what we look, if we want to multiply 7 times 9, we look for the nearest base of 10, which in this case is 10. So we have the number 10, and we're going to subtract each of these numbers from that base of 10. 9 from 10 is 1, and we put minus 1. 7 from 10 is what, anybody? 3, so we put minus 3. Now for the left-hand portion of the answer, we're going to subtract crosswise. And by the way, there's several other methods to get the same answer. But this is a simple one in Vedic math, so this is a simple one, so I'll use it. So we'll subtract 3 from 9 or 1 from 7. Either way, we're going to get 6. And with all math problems, multiplication, these are that will always work. It will never fail. And because of subsequent problems, the way we work with it, we then put a slash here. And for the right-hand portion, we're going to multiply these two minus numbers. So 3 times 1 is 3. So we have 63. Is that correct? In Vedic math, the children were taught their times tables through 5 times 5 was necessary. And after that, you could learn times tables above that or not. But you needed to learn your timetables up through 5 times 5. And so what we do is we carry this on just to show you a little bit how this works. For instance, just to keep it simple here, let's do 99 times 97. The nearest base of 10 is 100. So we subtract 99 from 100 is 0, 1. 97 from 100 is 0, 3. And so we have 99 minus 3 is 96. Or 97 minus 1 is 96. 3 times 1 is 0, 1. And the answer is 9,601. I'm sorry. Yeah. 3 times 1 is 3. A gross error. Anyway, so then I'm just going to skip a bunch of numbers and we'll just go, we'll do this one. Because I taught this to some young teenage girls just the other evening who both said they weren't very good at math. And they went in a short time to multiplying 9-digit numbers so easily. They were so excited. They were jumping up and down because they didn't think they could do math very well. So a simple one here. Times you can see what we're doing. So, okay. What's 999,999,999? What's the nearest 10? 1 billion. So we have literally take the 999 million from the billion, and we have get the zeros in here. 0, 0, 0, 0, 0, 0, 0, 0. Let's see, 3, 0, 0, 0, 1. And here we have the same, 0, 3. And so, minus 3 or minus 1 from 7 or minus 3 from 9, we have, I'll start over here. We have 9, 9, 9, 9, 9, 9, 9, 9. So we've subtracted, so we have 996 as our last digit. I'll put the slash in. And then 3 times 1 is still 3, so we get our zeros in. And we have 0, 0, 3, so our answer is 999 quadrillion, and you can read the rest. So basically, we've just multiplied 9-digit numbers about as quickly and easily as we can multiply to 1-digit numbers. And this holds true throughout all of Vedic math. In fact, Jagadguru says that in any problem, square root, anything, that if it's difficult, it's not Veda, because Veda does not allow a difficult solution to any problem. That's why we have people, there's some experts in India today that calculate in their head the square root for 9-digit numbers in about 1 to 2.5 seconds in their head, because it's simple and easy. So that's just a little, it's fun, a lot of fun, a little demonstration. In Australia, they're teaching this to kids, and they say it increases their creativity, their IQs. It actually calms down the hyper kids. The ones who didn't think they could learn actually begin learning all of their lessons. And so it has, they also tell us that this kind of math automatically unites the two hemispheres of the brain, brings them into cohesion. So okay, I'm going to open to some questions. If there's any questions about anything we've talked about this evening. Yes?
Does the golden ratio of the Greek structures of buildings fit into this anywhere?
It actually does. So far I haven't had time to really get into that, to explain that. But what we find over and over again through Vastu, which existed long before the so-called golden ratio, we find that we come to the exact same points and conclusions, but in Vastu we literally use a different method. And we actually, in order to fine-tune our creations to harmonize with the musical resonance between the subtle and physical atom, we can't actually do that and use the golden ratio method. We have to go back to the Vastu method to really do that fine-tuning. So we come to the same points, but Vastu does have a different method of doing it.
Yes. In Vastu, like for a building, then is there any, trying to harmonize with the person that would be living in there, any relationship to the person's birth date as there is in Compass School Feng Shui?
Well, I'm glad you asked that question. So again, the question is there anything in Vastu that allows us to harmonize a building to the person individually? And absolutely. In fact, it's not really Vastu unless that is done. When we design a building for an individual or individuals, when we do the spatial measurements, measuring the space, the dimensions of the building, the Ayadi formulas, as we call them, which is based on the wavelength of an atom at the moment that energy becomes matter. And this is actually backed up by modern science. It's the same measurement today. The moment in quantum physics, the same moment where energy becomes matter is the basis for the Ayadi calculations, quite literally. So we utilize that to create harmony between the terrestrial and celestial environments in the space, and then we take the individual's birth date, and we use what's called the nakshatra, which is a more heart-oriented relationship, oriented to the soul's purpose on the planet and incarnation. And we refine the dimensions of that building to optimally support that individual. And so very much a very integral part of Vastu in building construction. Yes? Yes?
Can you direct us to any websites where we can learn more about this science?
Yeah, actually I have a website, and so does Dr. Stapati, and if you type Vastu in the search engines, in the search engine I've noticed that there must be at least 20 times more websites now than there was just 8 years ago. So it's really taken off. But there are, and my website is simply, it's a little bit of a long name, and I'm wanting to change that, but simply Vastu with one A, VastuDesignAndConstruction.com. And that's my website. Yes?
I'm wondering about phenomena, you mentioned the tsunami and how the structure stayed, solid because it was vibrating.
Right, and those were big waves in the photo that they sent me.
That when somebody says you're lucky, you know, you weren't there or this didn't affect you, that person indeed was just vibrating at their optimal thing. And
Right,
they could be
so-
right in the center of it. But
Right, so your question is that vibration, that vibrational harmony actually makes a difference.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And it's not so-called luck.
Yeah, that's absolutely true, because that has everything to do as well with consciousness. In fact, that's where it begins, the vibration. Let's see, who was first? Yes?
What can a person do individually to enhance or change their own vibration?
Well, that's actually a very personal, individual journey, and at the same time, we are all very much alike.
I mean, after
Both.
all, every moment we are creating ourselves.
Mhm. Well, I will just then, because I could say a lot of things about that, even from my personal experiences and others, so I will just emphasize a little bit then what Mayan emphasizes, literally, in his spiritual science. And that is, he says that the individual with the full intent and focus, who spends only a few minutes a day with the purpose of reconnecting with the primal source, will inevitably experience that reconnection. Whatever the period of time is an individual matter, but he says they will. And Mayan tells us that the individual who reconnects consciously with that primal source, that at that point there is actually something as an explosion of consciousness, which will simply shift that individual from the distortions of the prior energy field into literally into the energy field of the ecstatic energy field of the source itself. And he also tells us that even such an individual will at times experience momentary doubt or confusion, but that will be momentary and no longer rules the individual. He says Mayan tells us that there will always be on the planet and among humankind arguments and doubt and distortions until each individual connects with the primal source. And Mayan says at that level there are no arguments and there are no distortions. And Mayan tells us that's the only level in which truly harmonic society is recreated. So in simple terms, it's actually returning to the love vibration. In love we know fear, guilt, self-doubt, etc. actually begin to be transmuted and evaporate within the love vibration. Everybody here could have things to say about that. But Mayan's emphasis is always returning to the source. So he's always emphasizing returning to the source. And Mayan tells us that the journey of returning to the source integrates all 5 levels of being. So that's all I'll try to answer on that right now. Yes?
Are there ways to use these frequencies and energies within an existing building to
There are.
ameliorate problems or improve
Yeah,
it?
yeah. We usually call that remediation. And I actually do a lot of that myself. I have for a number of years. And there definitely are. Sometimes small things make a difference. Small things with the intent.
So intent is a big part of it.
It is. Yeah, very much so. So, anything else? No. Yes?
Could you repeat for the tape what you were saying in break about the vortices and the ley lines in different parts of the earth?
Okay, yes, we were talking during the break about, I would describe it as actually choosing a place to build before we build. When people ask me to work with them with their building project, I say, well, please call me before you choose your land site. And so every aspect of the land and of the earth is literally a language to Vastu, and it tells us what the qualities, what the magnetic grid and the various qualities are, and also what Mother Earth's message to us is at that point. So the earth itself is the first and most important consideration. And so we do look at the qualities of the soil, the color, the kind of soil, the kind of rocks. We look at all these things because there's a lot of different qualities that go into that. We look at the surrounding environment. And what might be interesting to many people is we look at the direction of the slope of the land, because that changes the magnetics very much. Have you ever noticed how vegetation will change when the slope changes? And it's not just climate. There's more to it than that, but it all works together. And so we also look very carefully at the kind of flora and fauna and the health of the flora and the fauna. And the kind of flora, fauna, and fauna itself tells us everything practically about what Mother Earth's message and what the magnetic grid is in that area, just by examining the fauna and the flora, the animal life and the plant life. And another very important factor is we always measure the direction, which is a magnetic influence of the underground water flow. And we also work in relationship to above ground water flows. And with the magnetics of water, that changes with distance. So we look at all of it. There's a lot of things we look at. And it's all a language. And I have found with different people in my workshops where we go out and look at these things, the sensitive people, even if they didn't know the Vastu language, they will always feel the difference anyway. And so that's part of what we do in choosing a place to live. And the place for a temple site, incidentally, may be a very different dynamics than the place for a home. Some people will say, well, this is a good temple site, so I'll build my home there. But they may have problems with a home there. So, if it really is a temple site. So, any other questions about?
Just a general philosophic question. So, is someone who lives in an apartment that's, up off the ground, and you're not a sovereign being on your own piece of land, does that necessarily put you at a disadvantage for the unfoldment of your consciousness, as opposed to someone who's got this, piece of land that they claim and they've got, very carefully, mapped out and all that stuff? I'm just curious about your...
I certainly wouldn't just take that for granted, because for one thing, Vastu has all of the principles, and in building, why Vastu also has what we could call a code book, the building code book, and and apartments that house more different people and different families and so forth is a part of Vastu construction, and also multi-story. In Vastu, however, each apartment in the building, we actually apply principles that focus the energy within each apartment and actually create a protection zone between the apartments. And so that you create your own energy field within your apartment without having to be affected by your neighbors. So that's not always done today as far as getting influx from outside yourself into your apartment. But I wouldn't take it for granted that that's necessarily just a disadvantage. It would depend on a lot of different factors, what the resonance is and how supportive it is for you. And so I have sometimes said, and I'm not ready to take this back, we'll see, because I'm willing to be wrong, but personally I don't think I am. But I believe that 10 or 20 years from now, the building codes will all be reformulating around the Vastu building codes, which are in detail and also stimulate the creativity of the individual as well. And so when we look at the Vastu principles, we can build 1 million different homes, each one different from every other home, because it's exactly the same idea as creating musical compositions that are in harmony. And so there's a lot of creativity. Yes? Go ahead.
What observation do you have about the space that RVML is in here?
I haven't paid just a, I haven't actually looked at it and analyzed it. I should. It would be interesting to do, if they don't mind. But basically, there's some pretty good energetics right here, as far as environmentally and within the building. We look very closely to see at every building to see whether the mulum, that source of energy, is operating within that building or not, as far as the vibration of the building, too.
So,
Yes.
you know, early on, you said that when you went to India, you felt at home there. And when you came back, you didn't. And I would surmise that that's something to do with the architecture in this country is so out of harmony with nature. Would that be part of it?
It has a lot to do with that, but you know, most of the modern architecture in India is just as bad or worse. Because once the British took over for 300 years, everything shifted. The young people were put through British architectural schools, and as well as the others, and the Stapedis came close to becoming an extinct breed because many of them couldn't make a living. They'd done all the building up to that time, and some of them held on, and so it survived. But and now the architecture is coming back because in India, both people in the residences and businesses are finding out that when the Vastu is brought in, their businesses do better. And so that's happening in India, and there's major corporations. I heard about one recently in Europe that are asking for Vastu experts to come in and to design or redesign their buildings. Incidentally, Microsoft's first building was designed with Vastu principles. And so Vastu emphasizes that it's really interesting going back to Mayan's Eintrim, for instance, because it's a whole different world of thought in every way than what we've been accustomed to, even in India. Dr. Subardhanam says you kind of have to let go of everything you've ever learned, even religiously, and enter a whole new realm. For instance, in Mayan's theology, there's no good and evil. There's only harmony and dissonance. There's not actually good and bad. It's exactly the same as musical harmony and musical dissonance in every aspect of life in Mayan's theology. And so it's a whole different world that is being resurrected in a sense.
So is dissonance used like it is in music? My husband is a conductor.
It is.
He likes dissonance sometimes.
Oh, okay. Well, that can have an interesting effect too. But yes, it is as in music, and designed into visual form. The same principles work in visual form, operate in visual form as they do in audible form. I could actually, well, I won't read that right now. In my workshops, I always read excerpts from the Eintrim, and many of the people I will see them closing their eyes, and most of them tell me they say that reading from the Eintrim actually hits us right here. It strikes us in our heart first, and then we begin to think about it. But so that's kind of the level of writing in the Eintrim.
Is that book readily available? Or?
I'm trying to get hold of it again because it was for a while, and recently I can't get hold of it. Even Amazon.com had it, and now when you check on it, why they actually list it, but it's unavailable. And I know the publishers, and so I'm trying to find out when we can get it again. Yeah, it's a pretty deep and amazing study because we're kind of introduced to the Vastu science through letter, vowels and consonants, and letters taking form through the manifestation of the atomic nucleus, the 8 to 9 manifestation that we were mentioning in geometry, taking form as letters and then as numbers, and then as color rays and as sounds, and then this is carried on into poetry and language and speech, and then into music and into art and into sculpture and architecture. And so Mayan writes a grammar, actually. There's another whole book that is a grammar for the language, for the Prakrit language. In Mayan grammar, every aspect of language is actually brought into conscious understanding with the pulse of the original source itself. So as you get into Mayan science, everything is brought into resonance with the source. It doesn't matter what it is. That's the secret of Mayan science.
When you talk about grammar, does that just apply to that language, or I mean, does that apply to English?
Well, see, just a little explanation. He just asked, does Mayan grammar just apply to the Prakrit language? Primarily he is talking about that particular language. However, he tells us that any language, just like any musical composition, that applies these principles is also a universal or a cosmic or an empowered, a living language. And so Mayan tells us, however, that the Prakrit language is one which is actually capable of expressing the inexpressible, which is a very interesting way of putting it, I think. It's capable of expressing the inner feelings and resonating those feelings to in expression to other individuals, as well as thought. So it's capable of expressing both feeling and thought, both as a written and spoken language.
We're out of time, Ron.
Okay. Thank you, everybody.
Rogue Valley Metaphysical Library and Event Center is funded by grants, memberships, and donations. RVML is a 501c3, nonprofit, volunteer-operated organization providing easy access to thousands of books, videos, and audio programs on a variety of metaphysical, spiritual, and personal development subjects. RVML coordinates and produces an ongoing Tuesday night lecture series. Presenters offer a variety of metaphysical and socially significant topics to local community members and visitors. The lectures, followed by questions and answers, are presented in a relaxed and informal atmosphere. Everyone is welcome. RVML also coordinates and produces other major events throughout the year at larger venues throughout the Rogue Valley that attract nationally and internationally recognized experts. Using state-of-the-art equipment, RVML produces and distributes audio and visual recordings for distribution to individuals and organizations across the country. Metaphysics explores the nature of reality, the underlying causes of all things, and the role of humankind in the universe. The Metaphysical Library's mission involves providing easy access to a comprehensive collection of metaphysical, spiritual, and paranormal information that inspires, heals, and transforms. Make sure to visit us online at rvml.org for a complete online calendar of events. That's rvml.org.